RZ. My name's Stan, and today we're on, what is this, part 4? I think we're on part 4 of grinding your own squares, and this is for the do-it-yourself kit, coming available soon. And I got to get through this series and get this series done before I make them available. I want everyone to know what they're getting into before they even think about purchasing one of these kits. In part 1, we did the flat work. In part 2, we did the inside corner. In part 3, we established parallel and 90. And now in part 4, we're going to grind the actual hypotenuse. This is what your squares should look like up to this point. With the 90s ground here and here. All the flat work's complete, but you've still got a black ugly mess right here on the hypotenuse. So we're going to show you how to do that. Now, if you recall back in, let's see, what was it? Part 3, when we ground 90 and established parallelism on them, we made some little hold down hardware, little triangular shapes with a hole in them. Little bits of junk, doesn't matter what you make them out of. Could be aluminum, could be steel, with 1/4 inch holes in them. Pretty simple. But now what you need to make is a little triangular block. Very easy to make, doesn't have to be hard. It does need to be very parallel on both sides, so surface grind it and establish parallelism. 1/4 20 holes drilled and tapped each side. This one happens to be a through hole. And I'm going to show you how to block these two squares in. And at this point now we're matching them. You know, we've ground the 90 on one side, but now we're getting ready to grind the 45, and we want them to be the same. And we're going to use a V block to set up our tool and set up our tooling to get these squares parallel with each other. So let me get you guys in a little closer, and we'll get started on how we're going to do this. I'm going to show you a couple of sign plates. I'm going to show you a purpose-built sign plate that I use to make squares, but I don't think you want to go to that trouble just to make 3 pairs of squares. But I'm going to show you another way just on a magnetic sign plate. But let's bring you in and let's have a look at some of this tooling. Okay, what I've got here is a sign plate. It's not magnetic, just a regular plate. And it's a Suburban, and it's been modified by me. And you see I've got a couple of tool blocks bolted down to the plate, and you'll notice I've got very specific grooves in each side of these tool blocks. And so what we would do at this case is we'd make a gauge stack tilted up to 45. So we'd build a gauge stack here to our sign roll. And then at that point, our 3 grooves here, they're going to hold, this is a 3-inch or a 4-inch pair of squares. And so we've exposed right here where we can get in and grind here. And then we've got drilled and tapped holes here for hold down hardware to pin the squares in and hold them parallel with each other. And this matches the set. So this will do the 4-inch, but then I've got other grooves. This will also do a 3-inch. There's your 3-inch hypotenuse exposed, ready to grind. And without changing the setup, now we go into 2-inch. And then we've got a pair of 2-inch squares in there. And again, with the holes and the hold down hardware. So that works for the 3 sizes. This sign plate makes every size that I offer. So this does all the 90-45s here on this side. But then you'll probably notice there's another tool block on the other side. Let me spin that around. And this will do, I do 2 sizes of 60-30s. So your 60-30s will drop in here, and of course you change your gauge stack. And you can get in there and grind your hypotenuse. And then it'll also hold a bigger pair. So I got a pair handy. And here we've got the large wonkers in there, those big giant ones. And that's going to expose that hypotenuse there to grind that. Again, to see the hold down hardware holes there. So these holes don't really make any sense until you put a square in, and then all of a sudden everything kind of makes sense. Oh, look at the hold down hardware goes right in there. So this is my setup, but I grind a lot of squares. This is a lot of trouble to make. I don't think you want to go that far. Let's look at a onesie twosie way to do it without having the fancy sign plates. Okay, we're back, and we got rid of our fancy schmancy sign plate, and what I've got off there in the distance is just an ordinary magnetic sign plate, a 6x6, 5-inch roll-to-roll magnetic sign plate. So pretty standard stuff, nothing fancy about it. We're going to use an ordinary V-block that you know and trust is accurate, and we're going to be doing these pair of squares here. And that triangular block I told you to make is here. And drop that in your V-block, and then we're going to take our squares, and on the fence that we've already ground back here, we're going to drop that in behind the V-block. Just kind of perch it up on there and get those started. Now you're going to go to your triangular hardware and just get these just get this started in there. I'm not going super tight yet, just finger tight's good. So you get everything going. And just kind of get everything started in there. Make sure everything's very clean. And your squares are down firmly in the groove. Don't worry about what the block's doing. The block's parallel, on the sides. You made sure you ground it parallel, so your squares are going to be snapped parallel. But we've got about a 1-inch spacing on there. That block's roughly 1 inch thick, so we've got a good spacing. So we're going to get them nice and, we're going to get a good average over that V block. Then I want you to lay a 1, 2, 3 block on top here. Before we tighten up, we're going to come over to the edge of the table and just lightly clamp it. And just lightly clamp it down. That's going to assure you that your squares are down tight into the V groove. And we're kind of ignoring the V block. So our V block is just here kind of floating right now. But get your hardware all lined up. And then we're going to start tightening up our hardware. Okay. And tightening can influence them. Make sure you, counteract all your torque and everything when you're tightening. All right. So now we're tight. We can remove our clamp. I'm going to bring this back over to you and let you see everything. Get the 1, 2, 3 block out of here. And that's what you should end up with. And now you've got a pair of squares bolted together and synchronized on these back sides here. We're indexing our 45 off of the 90, So, and this is going to basically match them. But they're bolted in, they're blocked, they're ready to grind. And be gentle with them, don't knock them around. They can slip. Grinding is a very low pressure operation, so it's not going to give you any trouble. Now we're going to go to the plate. And we don't have a gauge block stack in here. I've just got it roughly set to give you an idea. And what you want to do is get this guy squarely in here and ready to grind. And just use your backside of your square or backside of your squares to bump into your 1, 2, 3 block up against a fence. And here we've presented just enough out here to grind. And you may have to block up with more parallels and things like that. We're going to turn on the magnet. And after you've stoned everything and cleaned everything, and that's secure enough. I'm ready to grind that. I'm happy with that. And we can make a grind across those two tops. Now this works the same way for the 60/30s. I'll show you how to do that coming up next. Okay, well I'm showing you here on the 60/30s, and we're using the same block, same hold down hardware. Now this one, you really can't do the clamp trick. Just use your fingertips after you've got your hardware fairly snug and they're snapped to parallel. The width of them is going to establish the squareness in the V-block. So just use your fingertips, and I'm going to show you another way to check them to make sure that they're that they haven't slipped or anything after you do this. You can just take this whole rig, set it down on the plate, and check it for rock. Use an indicator if you like, and what you're looking for is a diagonal rock, and that's going to tell you whether you got the things synchronized in there or synchronized to each other, and make sure you'll get a good grind. What you'd get is you get a good grind on one and a bad grind on the other one if you don't have your hardware properly set. All right, but that's how you block up a 60-30 with your triangular block, and then you'd come to your back to your magnetic plate. And let's see. Yep, it's pretty much the same thing. We've exposed our hypotenuse, and then you're going to tilt your plate. Find my little strap hardware here, and just tip your plate down. Establish your 30 degrees. Turn your magnet on and go. And then you're grinding up here on the top. Make sure you block them in. Make sure your work's very secure. Make sure you're comfortable with it before you go biting in there. If these things start walking on you and walk away from, if you're grinding in this direction, it's going to wedge in and it's going to create all kinds of havoc. So make sure your parts are very secure. And all magnets are different. Fine pole, standard pole, coarse pole. You know, it's going to change depending on what kind of magnet you have. So make sure your parts are secure. All right. So that's 2-inch 60-30s on how to grind those. Okay, so I'm blocked in, mag down, got my 60-30s in. I know I'm sitting down flat on the plate. I'm strong enough. I'm moving the plate around, so I'm happy with the holding power of that. This particular case, where our squares are parallel with the magnetic pole, which is not ideal. On some of your mag plates, you can rotate your mag plate 90 degrees, and you can bolt the top plate on your, or the top mag on your sign plate in any direction. So if you have that option, always go adjacent to your the poles of your magnet. You can see the poles of the magnet run in this direction. So if that's an option, use it. But I'm happy with that. I'm good to grind. Let's do one last example. We'll do the 9045s, the little ones, and show you how we block those in. Okay, so what we got here is a small pair of 9045s. These are already complete, but I can still show you on how to set them up. And you set them up much the same way, right back in the down into the V block, and you get your with your third hand, you get your you get all your hardware and everything started. So it's and there's your hold down hardware there in the center, and you can do the clamp trick on this one. The only one you can't do it on is the 60-30s. You'll play hell getting that clamp on there with that top sitting at an angle. You never know. If you make that tool block, that little triangular tool block, you might find a use for it for something else someday. All right, and now at this point, you're ready to do the 1, 2, 3 block trick. Drop it on, clamp down, tighten your hardware, and same thing. You're got a pair of squares ready to grind. Okay, and that's exposed your hypotenuse there. All right, so you can do all 3 pairs with 1 block with no problems. All righty. Okay, so now we finished the grind, and I want to show you how we measure. Now, I'm not going to touch my setup at all. I'm just going to kind of point to it and explain it to you. What I've got is 2 squares on the sign bar. The sign bar has a fence here in the back. I'm using magnets on each side to hold the squares parallel with the sign bar. I've got a gauge stack over here, set up for 45. And at this point now, and we've tapped our squares down into the rear fence and on the sign bar. So we're able to check for 45 and that we've matched them. And I've already set this up. So we're going to bring Mr. Gauge over, and hopefully we're not blowing out. And it's kind of glary a little bit. I'll do my best here. Okay, so we're going to just kind of set up on 0 there. Okay, we're going to make a sweep across this square. All right, so we're happy there. And now we're just, without moving it, we're just going to go straight over to the other square, and we're looking for equality. And you see, I'm maybe a 1/10 bigger on this one, which isn't terrible. And we're just going to sweep that other one. And you know, now we're checking them for size equality, and we're checking them for you know, our 45, which we've nailed both. So we're pretty happy there. If you had to make an adjustment on a single square, you can throw it in a toolmaker's vise and indicate it in and make a quick adjustment if you needed to. If one's just a little higher, or if one's slightly off on 45, you can make an adjustment. So if we came here on the sign bar, which I trust more than a V-block, you know, we did a setup in a V-block, which is, you know, they get banged around the shop and kind of shop grade things. So if they're not exactly 45, it's going to throw this off. So let's, we should probably see if we can find a bad square or a bad angle grind and see if we can make an adjustment in a toolmaker's vise on just one square and how we indicate that in. That might be pretty cool. So let's see if we can, see if I can find a bad one around here with a bad grind, and we'll make a correction on it in a toolmaker's vise. All right, that's coming up next. Okay, I got a pretty good example here of actually a grind that I'm not completely happy with. So I'm hoping you can see that gauge. It looks a little blurry in the viewfinder, but I'm going to sweep across here. Just come to rest, and I'm sure you can see my pen marks there. I've got a 0 and a -0.2 written in Sharpie, a very fine Sharpie, on the ends. So I'm zeroed up there. Just going to pull it across, and you can see it's fairly linear, and it drops down 2/10 by the time it gets to the end. Tip the camera over a little bit here. So we've dipped down 2/10 low over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate that error in a toolmaker's vise with just that one square. This other one measured really nice. I'm real happy with this one. This one ends up being high by 2/10, and you know, between matching the two, and it's got a 2/10 error. So by the time I grind 0 minus 2/10 to make it a 0, 0, they're going to match. So let's get this in a toolmaker's vise and make that correction on a single square. Okay, well, we got our toolmaker's vise out. We got our square clamped in. The fence is above the vise jaw on this side. And then I've got the other fence hanging out over here out of the screen where you can't see it. Here, I'll move it over here. So the other fence is over here. And we've got a 0 and a -0.2 reading that we took off the sign bar. So we're going to come here, we're going to 0 up. I got it pretty close now. Might need to tap it around a little bit. There, I got a happy 0 right there. I'm just going to sweep my toolmaker's vise across, and I'm going to try to duplicate that -0.2, which I have. So we're getting the same readings we had on the sign bar. So now we can tighten up our toolmaker's vise, and then we'll check and make sure it didn't move after we tighten. And 0 up again where everybody's happy. Happy. Take another sweep. And we're showing 3/10 below. So I might need another little tap there. Yep, just a tiny bit. Okay. All right, so there's our 2/10. Pretty happy with that. Now we're ready to go grind it. We can just throw this Toolmaker's Vise right in the, right down on the mag plate, do a flat grind, and we've made our correction. You have to establish a grind, something straight that you can measure off of, and then you can make any correction you like. So that's how we're going to correct one square. Alrighty, so let's go get this ground up, and maybe we'll bring it back and check it again on the sine bar. Okay, well, we're back from the grinder. We've taken our square out of our Toolmaker's Vise, and we've made our correction. And now we're going to see if we matched, match the two squares. I try to get in within a couple tenths of each other in size, and then so we'll check the angle. The square closest to us here is the one that we corrected. The one on the back side we didn't touch. So let's check for size difference. We're just going to go down here to the base. Just not even a tenth below zero. And now we're going to just kind of sweep over. I think I got enough clearance to come over to this guy. We do. That one's right on zero. And we're going to go ahead and make the sweep. It's about a tenth hollow in the middle, but we snap back up to zero at the end. So it's actually got a 1/10 saddle to it, which is pretty typical for these little thin parts when they do get a little warm. Even with coolant, they get warm enough where you'll still get a hollow grind. You have to make the finest of cuts if you want to get rid of that last tenth. So we're pretty happy that these things are matched. And these squares, this is a 3-inch square, so the hypotenuse is roughly 3.5. And this one's hollow in the center too. It's got about a tenth of hollow to it. It's got an error overall, about a tenth of overall error. But it's well within spec. A tenth over 3.5 inches is perfectly acceptable. Okay. So that's our correction after we made the correction in a Toolmaker's Vise. All right, guys, let's wrap it up. Okay, guys, well, that concludes grinding the hypotenuse on your squares. If you got any questions, feel free to drop me an email. I think I covered about everything we need to cover as far as grinding that. That's probably the hardest part of doing these is getting the angle right. Yeah, but if you've built them right up to this point, if your 90 is accurate, you got somewhere good to reference from, your 45 and your 60 is going to follow. So I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for tuning in.